Let's talk about Thom Gunn. Here's a poet who truly lived in two different worlds. He kicks off his career in Britain, as this absolute master of traditional, super-structured poetry. But then he completely reinvents himself in the anything-goes counterculture of San Francisco. It's just an incredible story of how changing your surroundings, your entire continent really, can totally reshape who you are as an artist.
So here's how we're going to break it down. We'll follow his path from being this disciplined rebel in his early days to his amazing embrace of freedom in America. We're also going to look at how he became one of the most powerful voices during the AIDS crisis. And finally, we'll talk about the incredible legacy he's left behind.
Okay, so if you want to get Thom Gunn, you have to understand this one thing, this constant, fascinating pull between his British roots and his American reinvention. It's basically the engine that drives all of his work. I mean, look at this. On one hand, his early British work, it's all about traditional forms, Poetry with a really strict rhythm and meter. It's focused on discipline and control, which perfectly reflects that post-war era. But then he gets to America and boom, a totally new voice emerges. One that's all about spontaneity and the wild energy of the 1960s counterculture. This wasn't just a move across the ocean, it was a complete artistic rebirth.
So, let's start back in the UK, where he just explodes onto the scene. He's seen as this master of control, but there's always this simmering, rebellious streak right under the surface. His first collection, Fighting Terms, was the perfect introduction to him. The poetry is so tight, so precise, so disciplined, and he uses all this imagery of war to explore this really deep idea that all of us are in this constant battle just to figure out who we are, to find some meaning in the world. It's powerful, it's stark, and honestly, it was like nothing else being written back then.
And with the sense of movement, he really seals the deal on his reputation. He takes that formal, controlled style of his and points it at these super modern symbols of rebellion. Think leather-clad motorcyclists, outlaws, that kind of thing. He was just completely fascinated by that tension between wanting total freedom and being stuck in the rigid boxes society puts us in. This collection really cemented him as a major voice in British poetry.
But then he moves to America, and everything changes. I mean, San Francisco in the 1960s, it was a whole different universe from post-war Britain, and it would completely transform not just his life, but the very DNA of his poetry. So he lands in San Francisco in the early 60s, right when the counterculture is starting to catch fire. And the effect on his writing was, immediate and just profound. By 1967, in his collection Touch, he's already breaking away from those strict forms. And by 71, with Molly, he's diving headfirst into some seriously wild experimental stuff. Yeah, Touch is really clear turning point. That rigid control from his early work starts to melt away, and you get this more open, more sensual style. He starts using free verse, which is basically poetry that doesn't have a set rhyme or rhythm, so it sounds a lot more like natural speech. His language gets way more direct, focusing on things like intimacy, desire, the body, a huge shift from the military themes of his youth.
And then you get Molly, which is his full-on dive into the counterculture. It's actually named after a mythical herb that protects Odysseus from a sorceress, which is pretty cool. The poems themselves are directly inspired by his experiences with LSD. He uses this fragmented, almost dreamlike language to try and capture what an altered state of consciousness actually feels like. It's a radical departure for sure, a search for liberation in some pretty unconventional ways. So Gunn had spent decades exploring freedom and desire in all these different forms. But in the 1980s, his poetry was forced to face a new, absolutely devastating reality, a crisis that would push the limits of his art and really his humanity.
The AIDS epidemic just swept through the gay community in San Francisco, and the toll it took was devastating. Gunn watched as his friends, his neighbors, his loved ones got sick and died. It was this period of just immense loss and fear and grief, but he didn't look away, not for a second. He bore witness to it all.
And the work that came out of this time, his 1992 collection, The Man with Night Sweats, is now considered by so many critics to be his masterpiece. But more than that, it's seen as one of the most vital, honest, artistic responses to the entire AIDS crisis. And what's just so incredible about it is how he brought the two halves of his artistic identity together to face this tragedy. He took the formal control of his early work, that discipline he'd mastered years before, and he combined it with the raw, unflinching emotional honesty he'd found in America. The result? A collection of poems that not only document the fear and the grief, but also celebrate the profound resilience of a community staring down the unthinkable.
So after this unbelievable continent-spanning journey, what is Thom Gunn's legacy? I mean, what did he leave us with?
Well, his legacy is just immense. He was one of those rare poets who could master both traditional forms and free verse, who could explore the deepest questions about being human with such honesty. But more than anything, he was a bridge between the past and the present, between discipline and freedom, and between Britain and America.
The thing about Thom Gunn is that he never, ever stood still. He was a poet of constant evolution, always pushing himself, always challenging the idea of what poetry could even be. His whole career is this powerful testament to an artist's ability to grow, to adapt, and to reflect the world around him with courageous clarity.
Thom Gunn's life and his work offer a pretty resounding yes to that question. In the hands of a master who's willing to live fully and bravely and honestly within that era, well, it's not just possible, it's absolutely essential.